Welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. You're watching the live stream recording of an actual radio program called Outlaw Radio. We record 4 blocks of audio, 14 minutes, 12 minutes, 11 minutes, and 9 minutes and 45 seconds. We send those 4 blocks of audio to His Productions, who formats it for radio. This is a nationally syndicated show. So it is produced into 2 different files for an hour-long program. You got to have station IDs at the top and bottom of the hour. We then take the audio back and produce it back together as one file, releasing it as a podcast. You're watching the live stream recording of, yes, the radio show that then becomes a podcast. And we're so glad that you've joined us. Again, we do this Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. And what it allows us to do is to interact with the audience. And so as we do the show, we'll be making reference to this live stream, hoping to generate more and more traffic. I am joined, as always, by Creighton Vaughn. Creighton is kind of the man behind the machine. Creighton, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me, as always.
So explain kind of how people can interact with me through, again, Facebook and YouTube are the 2 platforms we stream to.
I prefer to say interact with us.
There you go.
But the 2 best ways would be either the Facebook chat or the YouTube chat. I'm on both of them on the computer in front of me. So if you post anything, I'll be able to see it. If it's a good comment or a good question, we might take it live during one of the breaks. If it's kind of a bigger question, we might turn it into a whole episode unto itself. So yeah, that's basically it.
So there are 2 ways that you can watch the live stream. You can watch facebook.com/the Radio Outlaw. And again, in the comment section, Creighton is monitoring that in real time. Or on YouTube. The easiest way to find our YouTube channel is just to go to outlawradio.live. It was just Creighton and I last week. And this week, joining us in the studio is Deal Daddy Derek, back here with us in the flesh.
For duty. We're here. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Got a whole new camera angled when it's just you, which is pretty cool.
I know. It's awesome. This camera angle, I look like a burnt chicken nugget. Been out in the sun a little bit. It's nice.
You do kind of look like a burnt chicken nugget.
Yeah, I got a glow. Got that pregnancy glow. It's nice.
I've seen you look worse.
Is that a pregnancy glow or a Mormon glow?
No, Mormon glows in Mormon November. That's the whole thing.
That's a whole
thing, bro. Shout out to Church Stories podcast.
I'm sorry, did you say Mormon November?
Yeah, it's Mormon November. You can only drink milk, and then you have revelations and stuff like that, and in your dreams and everything. You got to check it out. Mormon November.
I 100% cannot tell if this is a joke
if
this is a real thing.
It's serious. It's serious. Church Stories podcast. You got to check them out. Shaman PD, Mormon November.
Let's be honest that there is nothing that Derek says that we shouldn't take very literally.
Yeah.
You know, he's the real straight shooter of the Outlaw Radio show. I do like the shirt that you're rocking.
I do, man. This is awesome. I actually got it from one of the local podcasts that I've been on. It's kind of great. It's it's the Outlaw Radio.
It would have been better. It would have been better if you're like, yeah, I got this at Goodwill. It's like we've given away 10 of them and they're already at Goodwill.
I found one at Goodwill. It really worked out.
It really did.
I was like, hey, man, wow, Zach, this was one of your old ones.
And then Creighton's rocking some old school 316 swag.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the first time on this show, I feel like the odd one out.
Yeah, but now
because my shirt's different.
That's a nice looking shirt, though. That's an old classic.
It's a good shirt.
The Mint Julep 316 shirts have been a huge hit.
Those are fire. Nice. Those are good.
Yeah, we'll have to rock some of those coming up.
I mean, it's a good summer shirt.
It is a very good summer shirt. Anyway, today I'm very excited about this episode. It's kind of been in the works for, I would say, like the last year, just kind of percolating back in the old brainstem. And finally, it was like I had time today to do some research. And so, yes, I have like lots of notes here that we're going to be getting
spoilers
to.
On those notes.
Yeah, spoilers. Yeah, if you can read any of that, good luck. I'm not sure I can read any of this, but
they look like the scrawlings of a madman.
They really do. I knew a very high profile pastor that his Bible studies were literally monkey scratch like that. And it's like, how do you even?
Is there a diagram in there?
I know, but I got like arrows pointing to thoughts. I feel like I'm Russell Crowe on a conspiracy movie.
Yes.
You know, where, or Mel Gibson. What was that movie where he's like a crazy person?
Everything that Mel Gibson's
Beautiful.
in?
I'm thinking of A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe. He's just kind of crazy, and he's like running yarn from points to points, and like we got stuff. Anyway,
Like the
so
FBI
today's episode is titling it "What Happened to Rob Bell." Now, on the kind of the titling for the live stream, you titled it a different way.
Right. I titled it "Learning from Rob Bell" because we don't actually talk about things before this. You just sent me the blurb that you post on Facebook, and
Yes.
like the first sentence on it is, "What can we learn from Rob Bell?" And so I was like, "Cool, learning from Rob Bell."
That was not
Let's
your
make it
answer
weird.
when I brought that up just a few minutes ago at all. That's not even close. What did you say earlier?
Okay, what I said earlier and what I said just now are both true. I was also going for a little bit of clickbait.
Right. like that's gonna, what would be great is if we were like, we have Rob Bell in studio and then you switch over and we have Deal Daddy
I
Derek
am Rob Bell.
actually pretend to be Rob Bell. Now that would be it's Rob, two B's, Bell with one L.
Yeah, it's Rob Smell.
Rob
Smell.
the bell curve, author
Oh
of the
my
bell
gosh.
curve.
Author of the bell curve. He went up and came down.
Anyway, so we're gonna get it. So you guys, I mean, what do you know of Rob Bell at all? Like, I think this will be kind of interesting.
Basically, the only thing I know about him was that he wrote that book, Love Wins, and he's like we would have burned him at the stake in the 1300s heretic. And that he basically doesn't believe in a hell and thinks that everyone goes to heaven.
Okay, that's
And
like
that's it.
that's like very much the very end of the story.
Yes.
The very end. And I'm gonna kind of probably, when we start the radio show, I'm gonna open with that question because that sets an interesting context. Derek, regarding Rob Bell, I mean, you've been in Christian circles your whole life. You're a little younger than Creighton. What do you know of Rob Bell?
Yeah, not much other than what we talked about in a couple weeks. I mean, he was never on my radar because I listened to like actual pastors and stuff like that. So never really, I mean, other than what we talked about where, yeah, he came up and then fell off.
So
Don't really
after
know all
you
that
got
much.
basically after you got here about 7:15
Mhm.
and we're like, hey, what are we doing? It's
No,
like,
because we brought him up a couple weeks ago. It might have been off air, but we talked about him
Okay.
a little bit. And that's where I was like, okay, Rob Bell.
so you watched a few videos here and there
Yeah.
just to try to
Yeah,
get a
exactly.
feel
Catch
for it.
up.
All right, well, I'd say let's go ahead and let's record a radio program. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Derek, as always, you're just kind of processing between blocks, bring in some thoughts. And if we're in a groove, we'll just kind of keep rolling. Creighton, you'll be in the show, but kind of a bit sparing because I've got a lot to talk about. But if I do bring up something because again, I have so much that you think I need to elaborate on or add some clarity to, you're going to kind of help me keep my train of thought heading in the right direction. So
I'll do my best.
yeah,
When you get on a roll, sometimes it's hard to stop the boulder. but
yeah,
I'll do
it
my
is.
best.
Yeah.
We doing
sure.
10 seconds?
Yes, we need to do to the 10 seconds. So this will technically be 14:10. I'm gonna hit some music and let's record a radio show. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. My name is Zach Adams, and I pastor a church located just outside of Athens, Georgia. The name of the church is Calvary 316. If you're local, let me invite you to come be my guest one Sunday soon. Our service begins promptly 10:30 a.m. If you aren't local, but maybe you're looking for a good church, you can always attend Calvary 316 digitally via our Sunday service stream, our live stream. If you're curious to learn more about the church, visit calvary316.tv. If you'd like to access our teaching archive, the teaching sermon video, audio, notes, check out c316.tv. And again, if you want to join us on Sunday mornings, you want to watch the live stream 10:30 a.m., check out our YouTube channel, calvary316.live, subscribe, or find us on facebook.com/calvary316. I do hope that wherever you're listening or however you're listening, whether you're listening via the airwaves, via one of our wonderful radio partners, this is a nationally syndicated radio show, or maybe you're listening to the podcast. Every episode of what you hear on the radio is podcasted in its entirety. The Outlaw Radio Show, Apple, Google, Spotify. Maybe you happen to be watching the recording of what you're listening to on our live stream. We live stream the recording of the Outlaw Radio Show outlawradio.live, facebook.com/the Radio Outlaw. We do that every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. So however you're listening or if you're watching, we are so glad that you're with us as we seek to deconstruct the negative perception that the world has of Christians by boldly discussing relevant topics in an honest and genuine way. I am joined, as always, by my sidekick, my partner in crime, Creighton Vaughn. Creighton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. How y'all doing out there?
So Creighton, presently speaking, again, if you're listening, you should be watching because he's monitoring the comment section of both the live stream on our Facebook page as well as YouTube. And so we're able to interact with the listening audience between the blocks of audio that you're listening to, again, radio or podcast. Today's episode is something that has been, I have been mulling over. It has been percolating. It's been an episode, Creighton, that I've been wanting to do. You and I have talked about this. I've been wanting to do this episode for really some time, a year plus. Just haven't had the opportunity to really dive in, to do the research that I felt like the episode warranted. But I'm going to title today's episode, What Happened to Rob Bell? Now, before I go any further in regards to the subject matter, or I provide a lead in, you and I are separated by about 10 years. And so I am kind of on that edge of being kind of between Gen Z and being a millennial. I am a millennial, but just kind of on that border. You're right in the heart of millennials. Again, 10 years separating you and I. I'm 38. You're about to be 28, or you're already 28?
Just turned 28.
So you just turned 28. So when I say the name Rob Bell, again, you and I coming from about a 10-year divide, what does that name mean to you? Like what hits you when you hear the name Rob Bell?
I think of a guy that I found out about in high school because he wrote a book called Love Wins, where he came out as a legitimate heretic who no longer believed in hell and who had some very weird concepts of what the afterlife would be like for anyone who died not believing in Jesus.
I'm not sure that was his intention to come out as a heretic. It just so happened that it caused quite a stir and was kind of a controversy within Christianity. But what's interesting is, again, I say Rob Bell, and your first thought immediately is Love Wins and the book and the controversy surrounding that and the kind of the fallout. What's fascinating, though, is that, again, this 10-year gap, that is like the end of the story of Rob Bell. And that for me, when I think of Rob Bell, yes, that's one of the things that comes into my mind. But man, there's like 10 years of other things that I think about before that. That was kind of just the culmination of just a tragedy. It was the final act of a bad story. There were many chapters written before that because Rob Bell was not a heretic. In fact, he was, for the most part, kind of the it boy within Christianity, within evangelical Christianity. Rob Bell was it. I mean, he was, you could say in a lot of ways, and I think this would be the truth, within a modern era, and I would classify a modern era by being kind of like the internet, the development of social media, the advent of YouTube, multimedia. Rob Bell was really the first celebrity pastor. I mean, he was on the cover of every magazine you can imagine. He was being given interviews by secular institutions. In fact, I in doing a little research, in 2006, the Chicago Sun-Times wrote an article declaring that Rob Bell was going to be the next Billy Graham. Again, not something that you would equate to a heresy. I mean, this was the poster child for evangelicalism. In fact, he started an entire trend when he came on the scene within the pastoral community. So you know how out of nowhere, it was like the trendy thing to do to wear like thick black rimmed glasses. Like if you were a pastor, I mean, you saw like every pastor rocking like thick black rimmed glasses, and like not the big ones that are kind of trendy today, but like the skinnier ones. I mean, you got some black rimmed glasses, but not that. I mean, we're talking like the thicker rimmed. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I know exactly what you mean.
It was a trend, and it kind of took, but that started, I'm not kidding, that started from Rob Bell. I mean, Rob Bell, no matter what he did, It was copied. It was emulated. I mean, he was stylish. Is he the next Billy Graham? Is he going to reach the next generation? In 2007, the Church Report named Bell number 10 and their top 50 most influential Christians in the world.
I didn't know that was a list that came out.
I'm sure it no longer exists, but I mean, that just gives you an idea. I mean, he was, and again, he's in his early 30s at this point. In June of 2011, Rob Bell made the Time magazine list of the 100 most influential people in the world.
Wow.
In 2011. The New York Times listed Rob Bell as one of the most influential Christians in the country. So you got to realize that when Rob Bell like hit the scene, it was with a lot of fanfare, a lot of media, a lot of accolades, a lot of attention. Again, a celebrity pastor. Everyone was talking about Rob Bell. Now, for me, so I graduated from Bible college in 2003. By that point, Rob Bell is already a thing. He's already established his church. But I didn't know anything about him. I hadn't heard of him by that point. He hadn't written a book by that juncture. So he hadn't really hit, I would say, mainstream culture where I would have heard about him. But I moved back to Georgia from California, 2003. I become a high school, middle school youth pastor. Go into 2004, and out of nowhere, a friend of mine was like, "Hey, I've got this DVD. You need to check it out." And I was like, and again, we're like early YouTube, so you're not going to YouTube. You're passing DVDs around. Things you have to order online. You have to get it. But I was like, "What is it?" Because it was slick. It was like in this like kind of teal blue case. It was clear. The branding was slick. It was pretty neat, and it was called a pneuma video. Now, a pneuma video, pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. But these pneuma videos were being produced by a company out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they were short films. Now pneuma videos, they would run from 2002 to 2009. So they had like a 7-year run. And the rumor was, I mean, these things were slick. They were about 10 minutes long, some a little longer, some a little short. They were creative. They were trendy. Again, when you're talking about like Christian culture where, we're running at the same time where Kirk Cameron is releasing Left Behind videos, like something that's cool and slick, well-produced, high-end, good music, thought-provoking. These pneuma videos were radical. Like they were cool. That was my first exposure. Now, what made them interesting, again, the content and the guy that was showcased. So the guy behind these pneuma videos, the one doing the narration, presenting the thought and the idea was Rob Bell. And again, that's where you started putting the face to the name. My first exposure, it was the glasses. It was cool. His presentation was slick. Was it cheesy? Wasn't preachy. Made you think, was thought-provoking. And I mean, the pneuma videos, they were releasing them. People were buying them, playing them in the church, showing them before a worship service or after to spark conversation. They were being assimilated into small groups. I think I was part of a small group that we would watch a pneuma video and then have conversations about them. Very well done, very fresh. 2002 to 2009. That was my very first exposure to Rob Bell. Now, again, we're still in the early phases of the internet, in regards to consuming a lot of Bible studies. It's hard to stream a lot of audio. Things are glitchy. Again, at that point, I'm consuming Bible studies by ordering someone's like complete MP3 set. I had Pastor Chuck's MP3 set, John Corson's MP3 set, and then I had Joe Foch's MP3 set. And that's kind of how you're consuming Bible studies. You're going to interject.
Yeah, and when you say MP3 set, you mean like MP3 CDs?
Yes, like
not like a file of MP3s.
No, we were not in quite the flash drive phase
right.
where it had like 1,000 files on it. No, it was like a full-blown CD with MP3 files so that you put it into your computer because no one had like an MP3 player. So you'd have to put it into your computer and you had like an HTML page that would come up that you could interact with the CD. I mean, that's
The dark ages.
It's the dark ages. No, it's amazing how technology flew. So my first exposure to Rob Bell are these Numa videos, which again are great. Put him on the map, put a face to the name, and then Rob Bell released his first book. His first book, 2005, had this really trendy title. It was called Velvet Elvis. And it was subtitled Repainting the Christian Faith. Now, at that point, there was some folks within Christianity that was starting to throw up a few flares. Okay, anytime you have the subtext repainting the Christian faith, it's sending up a little bit of alarm bells. Now, this is at the same time, again, for context, that you had, you have always had the seeker-friendly movement, but you had, again, this is a phrase you might not even be familiar with because it was a flash in the pan, but the emergent church movement, you had this, like, we're reimagining, we had the kind of the new revolution, the new Reformation, Brian McLaren, Rob Bell starting to get linked to some of these people. Again, very strange. But I enjoyed the book thoroughly. In fact, I read it. A good friend of mine read it. We would meet at IHOP and talk about the book. And one of the interesting things, and it was kind of this, again, the slick presentation of what Rob Bell was doing, is he would present ideas in the form of questions to provoke thought. Again, if you listen to the way that he teaches, he does the same thing. So he would never actually say something that was heretical. He would just ask a question where your answer could very well be heretical, but he wouldn't answer. Like, basically, like, imagine there being a cliff of heresy. Like, Rob Bell would never run off the cliff, but he would run right up to the edge, ask some questions with no safeguards or railings. So anybody that wasn't rooted, wasn't founded in their faith, I mean, they're running up to the edge and then running off of the edge. Again, I enjoyed it because it was thought-provoking. It made you think. It made you contemplate. It made you reevaluate certain things that, are these just traditions? Should this be orthodoxy? What things should we be letting go of? Which things should we be carrying forth? And so from the very beginning, Rob Bell was big. You had these Numa videos, you had the first book drop, and then you started learning a little bit more about the church he had planted, and you're like, oh my goodness. Now, don't go anywhere. We're going to continue these thoughts here with the Outlaw Radio Show. So much to say. So you don't remember the Numa videos at all?
Not at all.
Not at all.
I do remember you and one of the other youth counselors in the Strand reading Velvet Elvis, because I think we talked about it in Man Group at some point, or maybe we talked about it later. But I do remember Velvet Elvis from my interactions with you and the Strand.
Derek, Numa videos, did you ever see them? Did you ever, again, any of this ringing a bell? Or
no,
this is all
at that point, man, for me, it was probably like Veggie Tales and Bible, man. So it really wasn't like no Numa videos.
There were no Numa videos. All right, well, let me continue. I'm gonna kind of give a bio here and kind of explain a little bit more of who Rob Bell is and build some ideas towards this. So again, 12 minutes. Creighton, you ready?
10 seconds.
12 minutes, 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. Today's episode is what happened to Rob Bell. And I should probably, Creighton, for the sake of the audience, I should probably take a step back and to explain why it is that I'm talking about Rob Bell today. My intent is not to gossip about somebody. It's not to
bring up old scars.
It's not to bring up old scars. Really, this is kind of a requiem. This is more of an examination of a guy that was a huge star within Christianity, and for the most part had a tragic fall. Rob Bell today doesn't even really classify himself or consider himself a Christian and the orthodox sense of what a Christian is. And so it's like, how do you go from being the it child to like 20 years later being completely discredited, considered a heretic, fired, maybe let go from the church that you founded, the mega church? Like how does that happen? How does somebody go from being the guy to being the outcast, the black sheep of the family. And that's really the intent of today's episode is I want to try to explain why that happened, what happened to Rob Bell, and kind of the lessons that I think we should learn from that. Now, let me give you a little bit of bio about Rob Bell, especially for those within the audience that don't know anything about him. He was born August 23rd, 1970, which makes him presently 50 years old. I say that because when we start talking about his heyday, it's in the early 2000s. So if he's 50 now, I mean, you're talking he's 30 at the time. Again, kind of crazy how young he was when he hit the scene. So he's born 1970. He was born to Robert and Helen Bell. Again, believers. Interesting fun fact. Robert, his father, is a U.S. district judge who was appointed by Ronald Reagan. He grew up in just outside of Lansing, Michigan. He attended his parents' alma mater, which is Wheaton College, a Christian school that's located in Illinois. In 1992, Rob Bell graduated from Wheaton with a bachelor's degree in psychology. So he attended a Christian university, but he studied psychology. Again, went to the school because it's where both of his parents went. And so that was the logical place for him to go. While he was there, he met his wife, Kristen. Interesting, him and Kristen have been married since. They have 3 kids that you can find very little information about on the internet. Reason being is that Rob Bell always intentionally safeguarded his kids. While he was in the limelight, he protected his wife. One thing I should say about Rob Bell is that, again, I mentioned him as being kind of the first celebrity pastor in kind of the social media, internet time period. But, Rob Bell is not guilty of any particular moral failings. Like the man has been married to one woman. He's never been accused of infidelity, never been accused of mismanaging church funds, never been accused of being a bad boss or exacting unethical practices with the way church handled the finances or having a heavy hand in regards to church leadership. I mean, really, there's very little scourge on his reputation other than his theology and how it kind of played out. To this day, even after all of this, he's still married to the same woman, living in Los Angeles, 3 kids. Again, not being accused of any immorality, moral improprieties, which should be noted. Like, there's no moral failings, at least we know about, considering Rob Bell, and he should be commended for that. Regarding celebrity pastors, that places him kind of in a very unique category. So
unfortunately,
he's going to Wheaton College, gets a bachelor's, 1992. Again, another fun fact, Rob Bell was roommates with the lead singer of a very popular Christian band called All-Star United, was roommates with him. Rob Bell was very much a musician. So while at Wheaton College, he had started a band called Ton Bundle. They were well known in the region. He's a lead singer, was the lead singer from it. So he was used to performing, used to being on stage. He was also, side note, kind of a jock. So he was musical, he was artsy, he was creative, but he loved to ski, he loves to surf, he loves to play soccer. In fact, he was, after college, kind of without direction, he was working as a ski instructor at a camp. I think the camp was run by Wheaton College, and they needed somebody to fill in on a Sunday for kind of the camp church service. And it was there that Rob Bell actually spoke for the first time, killed it, and everyone was saying, hey, you should do this for a living. You should be a preacher. You're eloquent, you're different, you're creative, you have a different flair, a different style. This is very fresh. And so kind of with that in mind, Rob Bell, he moved to Pasadena, California to go to seminary, ended up with a Master's of Divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary. So again, his credentials are very, very much rooted in evangelicalism. Wheaton College, Fuller Seminary, very good credentials. Now, while he was wrapping up his Master's of Divinity, They were him and his wife going to a few different churches. Again, he now in Los Angeles has a new band called Big Phil, playing gigs in the Southern California area. But he, again, wanting to pursue a kind of a career in preaching, ends up taking an internship in the late 90s at a mega church called Calvary Church that's located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is not a Calvary Chapel church. As a matter of fact, the church itself, a mega church, massive church, was pastored by a man named Ed Dobson, not Charles Dobson, but Ed Dobson, which was kind of a famous guy. So he moves to Grand Rapids, Michigan to intern under Pastor Ed at Calvary Church. He ends up teaching the Sunday night service, which is where he starts gaining some chops, starts building a bit of a following, starts gaining some attention. Now, a little bit about Dobson to help round out a few of the influences. So Dobson ends up he's an Irishman who started what's known as the moral majority. You ever heard of the moral majority? Now, this goes back to the 90s, the 80s and the 90s. Jerry Falwell. Dobson got his start at Liberty University, is friends with Jerry Falwell, starts the moral majority, basically rallying Christians to being politically active for Republican causes. Now, by the time he ends up at Calvary Church, he's really rejected a lot of kind of his political background. He's kind of started out on his own. It's a non-denominational church that gives him kind of the freedom to explore certain things. He ends up taking an entire year, immerses himself in Judaism, and he lives as a Jew to try to understand what Jesus's life was like. So he observes the Sabbath in a very orthodox way. Again, he's an evangelical, pastoring a non-denominational church. He's observing all of the feast. He grows out his beard. He gets really deep into Judaism, which in turn has an influence later on, I believe, with Rob Bell. Aside from that, he also starts kind of getting very liberal in regards to kind of his progressive views about the church and its role within social causes. Famously, he came out and said that he had voted for Barack Obama in 2008 because he felt Obama, his policies were more in line with Jesus. Got a lot of kickback from this. Now, this is where Rob Bell goes to intern. This is the church. So he has a bunch of influences: Wheaton College, Fuller Theological Seminary, several different kind of trendy non-denominational churches in Southern California. I think he has a little bit of influence within Calvary Chapel from Bible teaching, expositional. He ends up going to study under Ed Dobson. He starts teaching the Sunday service. This is, again, the latter part of the 90s. And from that Sunday night service, they decide that they're going to take kind of a transplant church that's in a community outside of Grand Rapids, and they're gonna turn it into a church launch. So Calvary Church is going to get behind Rob Bell. They're going to take kind of an existing church and they're going to relaunch it, and they're going to rebrand it as Mars Hill Bible Church. Now, one of the things that kind of gets confusing about this time period is that there's another Mars Hill Church that was equally ginormous, and that is Mark Driscoll's church in Seattle, Washington, also known as Mars Hill. So there was a lot of which Mars Hill are you talking about? Are you talking about Rob Bell? Or are you talking about Mark Driscoll? So he starts February 7th, 1999. They launch out Mars Hill Bible Church. They started, now this is what gets crazy. They started in a school gym. Now we're 3 years before the first Numa video. We're a good 5-6 years before he writes a book. Okay. The very first Sunday, February 7th, 1999, in a school gymnasium. So they're launching with a couple hundred people. The very first Sunday, they have 1,000 people show up. They run out of chairs. They don't have enough chairs to sit the people that show up. Within 6 months of their launch, they have 4,000 people coming every Sunday. And within a year, they are given a shopping mall, an entire shopping mall. Within 1 year of starting the church, an entire shopping mall is donated. It takes them about a year to renovate. They buy all of the surrounding land. How you do this? 1 year in, I have no idea. And then they started, they did kind of a relaunch. By July of 2000, they had a 3,500 seat. They called it the Gray Chair Facility. It opened 3,500 chairs. They're immediately at 2 services. To give you an idea of his influence, they didn't call it a church service. He coined the term a church gathering. So don't go anywhere. We're going to build this thought here on the Outlaw Radio Show.
That kind of growth can only be dangerous.
Okay. What I'm going to get to is he's 28 years old.
That's how old I am. I couldn't handle that.
Imagine that. He's 28.
Oh my God.
And his only ministry experience has been interning for about a year at a megachurch. You know, an internship that gives you one of the main services to teach at.
What?
Right.
I've been interning with Calvary 316 for almost 10 years.
Yeah. And we would never let you do any of that. I mean, we had you do the opening this past Sunday.
And it was a disaster.
D, you got anything? Or you mean?
No, man, that is kind of wild though. That much exponential growth that quick. I didn't know he was 28 either. I didn't really put 1970. You said he was born. So wow, yeah, that's wild.
Yes. Let's get back. 11 minutes. Tons more to get to. 11 minutes. 11 minutes 10 seconds. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. Today's episode I've titled "What Happened to Rob Bell." 3 years before the very first Numa video was ever released, and more than 5 years before he ever wrote a book. After interning for about a year at a megachurch, studying under Ed Dobson, Rob Bell launched out a church plant with a couple hundred people they called Mars Hill Bible Church. Their first Sunday in a gymnasium, 1,000 people showed up. They ran out of chairs. Within 6 months, they had 4,000 people. By July 2000, they have been donated a shopping mall that they've renovated by buying all the land around it. They had a sanctuary of 3,500, what they called the Gray Chair Facility. Creighton, you and I were talking off air that Rob Bell is 28 years old as this is happening.
That's insane.
Which is your age, right? I mean, can you imagine?
No, I can't. We started a church, and it's been growing well, and it's been great.
And then we had a pandemic, and we took a step back a little bit. We've been building back from that. But like, can you imagine 1,000 people showing up your first Sunday? I mean, we were happy. We were happy with like a dozen. It's nice because we can say the dozens of members at Calvary 316. I mean, 1,000 people, and then within 6 months, you got 4,000 people. I mean, just the logistics, children's ministry, nursery, everything that goes around. Again, I'm saying this to say that you got to realize, you know, your context ends up being the Love Wins controversy. You go back 11 years to a 28-year-old Rob Bell that's a phenom. It's interesting. I ran across this quote because Ed Dobson was asked what he thought of this growth of Mars Hill, you know? And he said this, and this gives you an insight. He says, quote, "I have no explanation for the growth other than Rob kept it simple and basically taught the Bible."
Well, that would be the way to do it.
The very first thing that Rob Bell ever taught through. So he started a church, and I think he taught like 2 years, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, through the book of Leviticus. Like through the book of Leviticus. Again, a very talented orator. very creative, groundbreaking, thought-provoking. July 2000, multiple services. By 2005, all right, 2005, they have 11,000 people coming to the church. By March of 2011, they had shrunk to between 8,000 and 10,000. The reason is that they lost 2,000 when Rob Bell said that women could become pastors.
Right.
So they experienced incredible growth, but he's also demonstrated that, like, I'm going to make decisions, and if we lose people, so be it. I mean, again, when you're 11,000, you probably will be well served to lose a few thousand people. Again, incredible growth. I noted that he starts doing these Pneuma videos from 2002 to 2009. They do 24 of these short films. People are talking about Rob Bell. 2005, he releases his first book. Gets signed on by Zondervan, who also, by the way, buys the Pneuma franchise. So again, Zondervan, the big Christian publishing, I mean, they're all in on Rob Bell. All in, dumping tons of money behind him. Velvet Elvis, 2007, his second book was called Sex God. 2008, he released Jesus Wants to Save Christians. 2009, he releases Drops Like Stars. Understand, with every book that Rob Bell released, in addition to teaching every Sunday at Mars Hill, in addition to doing these Pneuma videos, in addition to writing books, he's also, with every book release, doing something kind of different. He's doing a tour. And again, this kind of ties back into, his band life. He's doing a tour. He launches with every book a tour, a speaking tour, where they go in and rent auditoriums, and he does a tour, a speech kind of around the book. He goes on tour, which is nuts. And again, he's got the biggest Christian publishing powerhouse behind him. It's amazing. He did this with every book. Now, fast forwarding a bit. As all of this is happening, as more Pneuma videos get released, as more audio is circulating on the internet, as, again, more books are being written, you get to 2011, and the consensus within a lot of evangelical communities is that Rob Bell is somebody that we should be very careful with. By this point, I would say by the late 2000s, churches are no longer showing Pneuma videos at church. People are kind of like, they still might read the book, but they're not talking about it.
They take the dust cover off.
I read, I think, the first two books, and then was like, okay, I see where this is going. And that's where people already kind of felt like, I know where this is going. I think the more the guy talks, the more it's revealed what he really thinks. And the more that happens, the more I'm really beginning to question his theology. This guy could be very dangerous. He's kind of, the star is beginning to lose some of its shimmer. And then the bomb gets dropped, right? Because the mask gets pulled off. There's no debating. Love Wins drops. And again, it gets pushed. I mean, it's a big thing. Has its own hashtag. Social media takes off. I mean, it is a thing. Love Wins. And in the book, basically, Rob Bell is questioning hell, the existence of hell, which then in turn is questioning salvation, the essence of salvation, what justification really looks like. I mean, everything kind of snowballs. And you had at this time a lot of the Christians that are just kind of going along with Rob Bell, not really thinking it all through, are now diving off of the cliff, because you have like major divides that are happening within Christianity, where it's like you have churches that are like, oh, we're going to do a small group on the next Rob Bell book because that's what we've been doing. And people are now leaving churches because, like, have you not read the book? This is heresy. Like, this is a complete break from a fundamental orthodoxy. This is not called for. As a matter of fact, when the book dropped, John Piper tweeted out 3 words, which kind of summarized it. He tweeted out, "Farewell, Rob Bell," because it was over.
Jeez.
Everyone knew it. In fact, Mars Hill ended up losing in the few months that followed 3,000 members. There was an exodus. It was announced September 22nd of 2011 that Rob Bell was resigning from the church that he had founded 12 years earlier. He was leaving. He said to, quote, start a spiritual talk show in Los Angeles, that this was the next phase of his spiritual journey. In fact, December 11th of 2011 was the last sermon that he taught at Mars Hill, was kind of his farewell. So he releases a book in March. They lose 3,000 members. By September, he's resigning. I would say he probably was fired. And then he gives his last farewell December 11th. And from that point, it's very interesting. So he moves to Los Angeles, and then he starts issuing all of these statements about kind of renouncing his own Christianity. He starts taking on, he's no longer tethered to a church. He's no longer tethered to accountability. He's in a very liberal area. He's now gotten connected with the producer of Lost. They're developing a talk show. The guy's name, Carlton Chase, the producer of Lost, teams up with him. They create a pilot. The Rob Bell Show debuts on Oprah's network, December 21st, 2014. That's all you can find about it. Like, it gets ghosted. They had like one episode, a pilot that was on OWN, and then it disappeared. 2013, he did an Oprah interview. Again, he changes all of his positions, like his positions on homosexuality. He goes completely progressive. His positions about the authority of Scripture. There were books where he's tiptoeing along the lines. He's full-blown rejecting the infallibility. He calls it the Jesus teachings. If you listen to anything he'll talk about the Genesis poem. He has gone full-blown into Judaism. A lot of very interesting things, again, being connected back to some of the progressiveness of his mentor, some of the Jewish thinking and thought processes, again, of his mentor. He basically falls off the map. Still doing speaking tours that very few people go to or are aware of. His website hails him as a freelance writer and a speaker. He does classes for writing. He has a podcast that, by the way, is successful. I won't name it. It was rated iTunes Best of 2015. April 29th. I had to dig deep into the interwebs for this. But April 29th of this year, he released a new album titled Humans on the Floor that sounds like a really bad version of the B-52s. It's atrocious. But he basically just kind of fell off. So with all that in mind, like, what do we learn? Like, what do we learn about the fall of Rob Bell from being the it guy, launching a church, huge success, seemingly doing it right, to then within 10 years being a heretic? Don't go anywhere. I'm going to answer that question on the Outlaw Radio Show. This kind of rounding into shape?
Yeah. We do have a couple of YouTube comments. My goodness. Facebook comments, actually. Pastor Bob is here. He was a bit late. Hi, Pastor Bob.
Hello, Pastor Bob. That's why we always have a little bit of delay in how we get started.
We also have a hello from Serbia, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce this guy's last name because there's not a chance I'm getting the first name.
Okay.
His last name is Milinkovic. I think. I don't speak Serbian, but I think that's it. I think it's Milinkovic.
Well,
something along those lines.
Welcome to the Outlaw Radio audience from Serbia.
Yes, Serbia.
We're international.
We're international, baby.
So, Derek, getting back to the show. I mean, you're beginning to have some thoughts about all of this.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of in a simplistic way too. It's kind of like, oh, well, he went down the wrong path, and God's not blessing him anymore. So, I mean, it is what it is. If all his people are leaving him and he's falling off and going down the wrong path, I mean, the devil can still throw blessings your way too, but at the same time, like, you're just not going to reach that same level.
I have an interesting take.
I'm always worried when you say things like that.
I get excited when you say things like that.
Let's do this. Let's do this. 9:45 or basically 10 minutes.
Got it.
Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. I'm talking about what happened to Rob Bell and what we can learn from it. Before I get to a few points, I want to read a few quotes that I think are insightful. Again, coming from several different interviews. Rob Bell's quoted as saying, "My parents were intellectually rigorous. Ask questions, explore. Don't take things at face value. Stretch. I've always been interested in the thing behind the thing." Again, he went to Wheaton because it was his parents' alma mater, and he studied psychology. Rob Bell said, of his childhood, he said, "I had no idea where I fit, but I've always been drawn to the outcast, to the girl with the black fingernail polish." About 5 years into their church, Mars Hill, again, 10,000 people coming, Bell talks about in an interview how he was burned out. And you can imagine. What's interesting is that the solution to the burnout was that he started seeing a therapist and then took 10 weeks off as a sabbatical. And then he said, "It began deep in my soul that I had nothing to prove. I had to die to the need to achieve and impress." One of his friends describes Rob Bell as actually being kind of introverted, if that makes sense, which I actually understand, that intrinsically, a lot of times introverts can project as being very extroverted on stage, but then are very private and reserved in their own lives, which is kind of sets an interesting psychology when it comes to Rob Bell. I ran across an interview on March 23rd, 2008, and this is to be very revealing. He said, God could give me 50 more years, and he's speaking towards kind of the controversy surrounding him. He said, "So don't wind me up. If you're offended now, I'm just getting started," which again is very interesting. What happened to Rob Bell? Rob Bell is absolutely the byproduct of broken evangelicalism. Rob Bell had no reason ever being a pastor of a church. Yes, he's creative. Yes, he's eloquent. But here's the interesting thing. I had always felt like Rob Bell had a particular theology. And then it was over time that he's kind of is conditioned, like that Rob Bell couldn't articulate what he really believed because he knew it wouldn't be palpable. And so he kind of leads his congregation. He's leading Christianity on like this exploration where he's introducing ideas, he's asking questions, he's unpacking things, trying to lead you systematically to some maybe different conclusions. Again, a Velvet Elvis repainting Christianity. What I've come to find out, though, is that Rob Bell did not know what he believed from the beginning. That what you're actually seeing throughout the course of the Numa videos, what began as being pretty orthodox and pretty fundamental, begins taking weird turns because Rob Bell started taking weird turns. That Rob Bell didn't know what he really believed in. Again, he has a degree at Wheaton, sure, in psychology. And he's a master's of divinity only after the fact that he realized he wanted to be a preacher. There's no mention, no story of calling, of commission. And then he goes to a non-denominational church, has very little mentorship, very little stewardship. He gets some wacky theology introduced, and then he starts this church at 28. It takes off. I think Rob Bell is learning on the fly. He didn't know what he believed. And then not only that, but I think he was given a platform for all the wrong reasons. Again, you listen to Rob Bell today. He's smooth, man. He's sharp. He's polished. He's a 28-year-old musician who's trendy. He's got like dyed blonde hair, and an older megachurch pastor's like, yeah, that guy can be it. And then Zondervan jumps behind him, and this whole machine comes behind him. He didn't know what he believed to begin with, and then he's given a platform for the wrong reasons. And what happens, I mean, inevitably, and it's hard to blame him, but quick success feeds ego. I mean, he had a need for the limelight. He's in a rock band, multiple rock bands. The very first thing that allures him to preaching or to pastoral ministry is preaching. It's being on the stage. He's good at it. He's comfortable, but he's an introvert otherwise. It's interesting, the guy that actually replaced him at Mars Hill Church, son of Ed Dobbins, Kent Dobson. He was hired August 2012. He quit in 2015. And this is what he said when he resigned. Being a pastor at a church is not really who I am. And, I think that he realized way early what Rob Bell always sensed, maybe from the beginning, that he wasn't a pastor, and that he was learning out his own theology, his own ethic on the fly. His success fed his ego. He wasn't rooted. He wasn't grounded. And then not only that, but it seems as though Rob Bell was kind of novel for the sake of novelty. It's interesting that he was called the Hellraiser, that he was a disruptor, that he enjoyed that. Again, he is pure, tried and true Gen X. He's the Nirvana generation. He's the guy that's trying to push the status quo, that it's inherent. And the truth, again, the quote that from 2008, he enjoyed being controversial because it fed the image, it fed the branding. I think at some point, Rob Bell realized that he wasn't a Christian. He's pastoring a church, he's writing best-selling Christian books, but the more he's beginning to understand his own theology about sexuality, about gender, about marriage, about the authority of Scripture, trying to reconcile things to Judaism. I mean, the more he begins, Rob Bell, it's been said, kind of adhered to what's known as a trajectory hermeneutics, that he believed that the Bible established kind of the trajectory by which we should understand certain theological principles. That yes, in the Old Testament, it was a patriarchal hierarchy. And yes, in the New Testament, Jesus' disciples were male. But there were principles being established, such in our culture, women could be pastors. The problem is like, when did the trajectory change? But again, I think instead of viewing it as like Rob Bell had he just wasn't being transparent. I think the story of Rob Bell is he was learning on the fly because he wasn't founded and should have never been anywhere near a pulpit because he didn't have a theology established on his own. He wasn't a Christian. And then he realizes it. And he writes Love Wins. And what happens? Rob Bell experiences a backlash from Christians, which made his escape easy. He could do what liberals would herald. Blame evangelicals, those bigots, those haters. I'm trying to push Christianity into the 21st century. I'm trying to be a new reformer. I'm trying to challenge the status quo, and no one's listening. And instead, I get run out of my church, and I'm losing my book deals, and I get this incredible backlash. He can blame evangelicals. Now, the irony is that Rob Bell, I'm sure, thought he would be accepted in the secular world, the Oprah world. And initially he was, but today he's completely rejected and is doing nothing. Has little to no influence. And I think Rob Bell's happy, interestingly enough. Because again, Rob Bell should have never been a pastor to begin with. And it was the evangelical church. It was seeker-friendlyism. It was the rush to take a young kid who's sharp, who's thought-provoking, who's trendy, and to put him in a position where he was destined to be chewed up and spit out. That's the tragedy. The lesson, what happened to Rob Bell? Evangelical leaders are what happened to Rob Bell. Major publishing houses are what happened to Rob Bell. Rob Bell should have been left off the stage. He should have been given the freedom to work out his own Christianity before he ever started talking to anybody else about what it meant to be a Christian. Creighton, you got anything?
No, man, that was heavy though.
But isn't it true? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, when you were talking about just the sheer speed at which he grew, I was expecting this to be a flame out kind of story, which it did turn out to be. It's just not necessarily the way that I thought.
It is a flame out story, but it was the revelation that I have no business being a pastor because I'm not even sure I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was rooted at the beginning. Anyway, you've been listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. Craig, and thank you for being with me.
It is always a pleasure.
For our contact information, it's very easy to find. Go to outlawradio.org. Our email, links to Facebook, to Twitter. Again, outlawradio.org. If you're listening on the radio, check out our podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you're listening on the radio or our podcast, check out the live stream recording of the Outlaw Radio Show. Easiest place to find it is outlawradio.live. Once again, my name is Zach Adams, and I hope you join me again this time next week for more of the Outlaw Radio Show. So, Derek, I kind of set you up because I think the surface level. I mean, I had the same thoughts about. You're always worried about quick success. You're always worried about someone that gets thrown into the limelight that kind of craves the limelight. You always worry about ego and that being tied into identity. I think that the interesting twist is I think it actually reveals in Rob Bell's situation that he didn't have an identity to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those type of questions can probably stem from two different places. One, it's either your own personal self-doubt, or two, your understanding and trying to bring up questions that maybe these other people are having complicated questions to bring it up to discuss it. But like you were saying, if he never believed to begin with and all that doubt in there is from the very beginning, it just took him a long time to get to a point to where he never truly understood what it was to be a Christian and then just go off the rails like that. So
in Velvet Elvis, like the whole idea, which, by the way, was the name of his first album with his first band, was Velvet Elvis.
Oh, Rob Bell.
Mm.
I don't know why I thought you meant the first Elvis
Rob Bell,
album
like
was
that,
Velvet Elvis.
The band he was in Wheaton College, like their first album was called Velvet Elvis.
So do you think to him it was just performing whole time, just performance?
I think what he did from the stage was very much performance. Mm-hmm. Again, though, okay, so I didn't mention this on the radio. So what brought Rob Bell back into my world was when I was prepping for the study that I did through Leviticus. And again, I did mention on air that he did like 2 years through Leviticus. You can't find any of that audio. That audio has been ghosted.
Really?
Can't find any of that teaching audio. But a friend of mine was like, hey, you should listen to this 4-part series that Rob Bell has available on his website, titled, I think, Blood, Guts, and Fire, the Gospel According to Leviticus. And basically, he took the entire series in retrospect and redid it as 4 audio files that are each an hour. They're each 3 hours long. So it's 12 hours in full. And he goes through each book, like each chapter of Leviticus. So it's expositional, but he's not going verse by verse or line by line. He's basically addressing concepts. And my friend that recommended I listened to this was like, you have the ability to chew the meat and spit out the bones. I would never recommend this to anyone else because you could choke and die. Which when you listen to when you listen to it, it's very true, because like it could be like you could very easily take something that he said, and if you believe it, then you're walking into heresy. I'm very rooted in what I believe, and I loved it. I thought it was riveting. The first 2, like, they get progressively worse. But there was one episode where he's doing, I forget which chapter it is, but he's talking about the 2 goats, the scapegoat. And what and again, he's very much into Jewish culture and heritage and history and traditions. And I mean, he's bringing it, like really engaging, very cool. He helped me see the 10,000 foot perspective in a way that nobody else I listened to when it came to Leviticus helped me do. The deeper you got, the less clear he saw. What vision? Was that nearsightedness, where you can see far away but you can't see up close? Farsightedness
means you can see far.
He can see far away, but the closer he got, he just lost it. And the 2 goats one was it, because I mean he's nailing it, and then just there's no Jesus, and I'm just banging my head against the table like how do you go through all that and you've missed Jesus? Well, I went back and I watched. I know this is a long story to answer your question, but I found a Bible study that he gave, ironically, at Willow Creek, which is the big mega church in Chicago, Bill Hybels' church. So it's a young Rob Bell doing the 2 goats study from the original series. And like, dude, he was creative, and he had called ahead. They had gotten a guy that owned a goat, had gotten him to dress up as a high priest. And at one point he brings in the goat, and a live goat on stage, and like he's talking about the goat. Like it's very creative. Again, he's a very wonderful speaker, and he gets the gospel, man. He nailed the gospel, which was interesting to me. and that he got the gospel.
But in the retrospective that he did later on,
Left it all out. And I think to your question, was it performance? I think Rob Bell initially was living a Christianity that was well-serving. That he knew, this is what I believe. And if I believe these things and I add to it my charisma, I will be successful. So again, I mentioned that one of his things is he was always asking questions, provocative questions, would never really give an answer, but was always asking. And that's kind of how he led you on a journey. And in Velvet Elvis, one of the things is the whole idea of the book is like, is this it? Like, there's this painting of a Velvet Elvis he saw in a garage. He's like, what if you thought like that was the end of art? Like it didn't get any better than that. Like that would be silly. And he says like this idea of holding to just this purely fundamental view of the Bible and Christianity, it's like, where's the room for it to evolve and to breathe and to become something even more beautiful? And sure, there are certain aspects of Christianity that have changed and have developed and have evolved in good ways. You know, I mean, over the years, I mean, we had church services in Latin for about 1,000 years, you know, like, and
Beautiful
that evolved.
language.
Then we had the
Beautiful.
Bible only written in Latin, but that evolved, and it was translated into the language of the people. And worship, the worship, the expression of worship has evolved over the years in a good way. There are things that have evolved. Church, Sunday attire has become more contemporary and more laid back. Again, I get the idea of there are areas where we can evolve. We can better connect with the culture. But he started asking, like, one of the questions, he's like, what if we found out that Jesus had a dad named Steve? Would it change what we think of Jesus? And it's like, yeah, no, the whole virgin birth thing, it's kind of central. But what was happening, and I think, and the more I've studied it, we always thought Rob Bell had a belief. And the questions he was asking, it was like veiling his beliefs and walking us along. I think it was Rob Bell asking questions he was asking then. Like, as he's starting to now ask questions, like I go back to my parents were intellectually rigorous, ask questions, explore, don't take things at face value, stretch. I've always been interested in the thing behind the thing. And I think as he was continuing, again, I think he started as a baby infant, as a Christian infant.
That actually plays really well into one of Pastor Bob's comments.
Yes.
Which is just that he didn't come up through a Bible teaching church before becoming a pastor.
Amen.
Which is a terrible shame.
Now, what's interesting is that he did teach the Bible initially, but then you saw a progression where it was teaching from the Bible, and then it was kind of teaching the Bible to teaching concepts within the Bible to teaching overarching principles. Like there was this constant progression away. And again, it happened. I mean, you're talking like he starts Mars Hill in 1999. Love Wins comes out in 2011. I think when you read through his writings or you listen to his sermons, you're actually like, think of it as like, I'm seeing someone for the first time come to their own theological conclusions. Everyone should be free to do that. The tragedy is that's why he should have never been a pastor to begin with.
Because he wasn't there to begin with.
And if he had been given the room, maybe his story would be different today. But again, he's thrust into the limelight. He is the it guy. And then let's say he's sincerely just working things out instead of people really coming alongside of him to try to walk him through it. He has poor mentors.
He's
it blows up
questions at a point when people are looking at him for answers.
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like when you're thrown into it that young too, at that level, it's like, who's going to be your mentor then? If you're the big dog, you're pastoring 8,000 people. I mean, who's your mentor? If you founded the church, who are you going to have that's wiser of you that you need to, you know, it says seek counsel. The Bible says seek counsel. Who's going to be his counsel?
And again, you want to talk about, so one of the things that was insightful is, you think, well, they opened the doors and 1,000 people showed up on day one. And it's like, man, when you dig into it, and again, I would love to get way more into the weeds and see what type of financial connections exist still between Mars Hill Church and Calvary Church. Again, it's interesting that when Rob Bell comes from that church, they're called the Launching Church. They were taking a church of a couple hundred people. I mean, Rob Bell didn't plant a church, like in the sense of like how we're doing it. Like that he did not plant a church. I mean, when within the first month, you have a shopping mall donated, and you have major money behind you. These are people that see you and think, we can ride this guy. Like, this is worth investing money into. He's 28. And then Zondervan, and then the fact that when he leaves, who takes over? The son of the planting. You know, there's the whole connection.
There's some sketchiness in there.
That's weird.
It is weird. Well, thank you guys. I thought today was fun. I hope everybody who was watching found it interesting.
Yeah, everyone around the world.
Everyone, our contingency in Serbia.
International, baby.
I'm going to hit some music, and we're going to get out of here, so I'm going to watch the Hawks.
Derek, you're up first.
Good night.
See y'all.
See you guys. Thanks for watching.